short-term personality hires. I'm very intrigued by that. There have been moments where I'm just like, am I?
You may have had somebody who was really great at what they did, and yet that person has not upscaled themselves, but you have elevated that person to a director level.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and they're obviously not cutting it. So what do we do with these people? If the person doesn't have the ability, yes, we can train them. If they don't have the will, what do? One should not be comparing the remote aspect of today with COVID, because there were no precedents to this.
We were just figuring it out.
We were. And now we know, right?
What are the systems that can be put into place to ensure that bias isn't something that plays into performance management?
If this were my company, and knowing this individual as I know this individual and their performance, would I give them the best possible raise? Would I want them on my team going forward?
So when we talk about talent management in an organization, that onus is usually on the leadership. Who keeps the leadership accountable?
That's a great one.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to She Talks Business with me, your Karachi host, Khizra Munir. And today I have a really special guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Fauzia.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Fauzia, you and I were just having a conversation how my layman perspective of HR and talent management was hiring, firing, and payroll management. But it's really evolved now. Can you give me a little insight into this evolution?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The landscape has changed completely, right? So we have evolved from sort of HR management to HR development, HRD, which involves a lot more. So it's, the entire life cycle of the employee from the minute you are hired and probably pre-hiring, right? And once the person is on board, you want to obviously retain them because the cost of hiring an individual is 5 times more than that of retaining one, right? Hence, you want to give it your best to retain these individuals. And now we talk about high potential development. We talk about leadership academies. And now with, Gen AI, again, the whole thing has completely, the whole fabric of society as we know it has changed, right?
Right.
And hence, it's about upskilling, it's about reskilling. Making sure that they want to stay with you and that they are productive members while. And then, of course, the exit part of it and how do you handle the exit.
Sure. So getting down to like the basics in terms of evaluating and appraising employees, conventionally, the calendar for that is annual.
Yeah.
It happens once a year. Everyone's working towards it. Or not working towards it and sort of like gearing up when it's time for like performance reviews and appraisals, etc. But there's been a shift.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
There's been a huge shift, right? Because I think in retrospect, people have realized that this model does not work well because it's more backward thinking. It's recriminational, okay? So when you have your performance review, what they're talking about primarily is, this didn't go right, you could have done this better, and these are the challenges you faced. Now we're going towards more of a growth-focused, forward-thinking, future-oriented kind of appraisal, right? And not even appraisal, so call it check-ins. A lot of people are moving away from that word too.
Right.
So a lot of companies, I would say like GE and all those, back in the 2010s, earlier if possible, moved away from this system and went to a more relevant form of reviews, which are timely. So they're continuous. Right? Okay. So don't just wait for the end of the year or a biannual sort of process, right? It could be quarterly, it could be monthly, it could be when you need it. Provide timely feedback, provide relevant feedback, and a continuous feedback loop.
Hypothetically, what does that loop look like? Like a regular, timely feedback loop?
So, you would have certain objectives, KPIs or so that you're marking them against. So you'll be like, okay, so for instance, in my line of work, it may be like I had to launch the HR manual, for instance, okay? So at the end of the year, they say, okay, how far have you gotten in that? I would say it's maybe 70% done. So I will grade you 70% on that, on a scale of 1 to 5 or Likert scale, whatever scale you're following, right? So on teamwork, how do I rate? How collaborative am I? Do I have leadership capabilities? Am I innovative? How would you rate my communication skills? So now these are ratings. And then what is the question? So a lot of them would not follow up with a plan. There has to be a growth plan. It has to be an individual development plan linked to this, which would actually guide my development. You've told me what's wrong with me.
Right.
But then where do I go with that? Just last year, we were working on this large-scale project. It was a startup which was in the growth phase, and now they've accumulated a lot of people along the way, which may not be essential to the operations, some of them. Some have not evolved with the company. You may have had somebody who was really great at what they did, your classmate, you all started together in a basement, hey, hoo-ha.
Yeah.
And yet that person has not upscaled themselves, but by sheer dint of loyalty and number of years spent, you have elevated that person to a director level.
Exactly.
And they're obviously not cutting it.
Right.
So what do we do with these people, right? That was the question. So what we did was we actually initialized the 9-box grid, which is a really great way to map your individuals based on performance and potential and see where they stand, right? So you could have certain people who are stars.
Okay.
Which is that end, right? That box.
Right.
And then you have those that are at risk to the organization. So what you do with the risk ones, and those are the dead words that I'm referring to, right? What you do is you have like a performance improvement plan in place.
Okay.
Yeah, and you give them a certain time period. You're like, I will help you develop whatever needs to be done in order for you to get to this level.
Right.
Right? But this is the amount of time you have.
Right. Sure.
And so it's a clear message for them also. And so that sort of weeded out a lot of the, say, unwanteds, perhaps.
Right.
And also a strategic improvement plan for the director levels that I'm speaking of.
Right.
Right? So are you strategic in your approach? Are you innovative? How operational are you versus how innovative are you? Right? Because at that level, I don't need you to be totally operational.
Right.
So if I have been, say, training, right? I've been designing and delivering trainings. That's great. And I was great at it. And now I've gotten promoted to, say, the chief learning officer, right? Do I continue designing and delivering those trainings? No. I now need to look at it from a more strategic level and see how the trainings that we are delivering and designing align with the business objectives. How are they feeding into the growth plan of the company?
But so that example that you quoted about sort of how to deal with the dead wood.
Yeah.
I think that's a very constructive way of dealing with a situation where you're not sort of victimizing someone.
Yeah.
You're actually laying it out that this is where you need to upskill.
Yeah.
We're giving you that opportunity. But if it doesn't work out, it's because you
chose not to. Right?
Exactly.
So in terms of whenever we talk about work, delivery, performance, there are two aspects to it. Okay, one is the will of the person. How much do they want to? The motivation to do certain things. And the other is the ability. The skill and the will matrix is what we look at, right? So if the person doesn't have the ability, yes, we can train them.
Right.
If they don't have the will, what do you do? Right?
That's
some people are just very complacent.
Yes.
They're just very happy being where they are with those increments all over the years, but it doesn't serve the company well.
Right.
So the official forms that you would have, and I know that in state-run companies today in Pakistan, you still have those, pro forma kind of things, and where you fill all these things out, and it goes in your file, and the file is maintained year over year, and the form is barely changed. Now they're moving away from that, and they're saying, ask a few basic questions, right? Ask questions like, how are you progressing? Is there anything I can help you with? Are you facing any challenges that I can help you overcome?
Right.
Is there any way that you want to improve or upskill, right? So these kind of things. In fact, Deloitte has a very interesting one. It says, okay, so what you do is you basically ask 3 or 4 questions. One of them is that if this were my company, and knowing this individual as I know this individual and their performance, would I give them the best possible raise and increment and bonus that I could? Also, if this was my company and knowing this individual, would I want them on my team going forward? Right? Also, is this person at risk of poor performance? And are they ready for a promotion? Yes or no kind of thing, right?
Okay.
So very, very simple questions which determine whether this person is ready, whether they need an intervention. If they need help, then you give it. You have a growth sort of mindset, right? And this inculcates kind of loyalty, engagement. People feel more bound and people feel like they're on a path of improvement because somebody's helping them.
And somebody cares.
Someone cares. It's continuous feedback.
Right.
That is the loop.
How do leaders and managers balance timely accountability with micromanagement?
Yeah.
How do we avoid one thing becoming the other? How do you avoid timely accountability and timely sort of mediation with micromanagement? Like, oh my God, this person's always looking over my shoulder.
Yeah. So one way is to give them, the responsibility with the accountability.
Right.
So if I give you a job, right?
Yeah.
And I say, look, this is your baby now.
Right.
Right? You are responsible at the end of the day, whether this fails or succeeds.
Right.
But at the same time, I have to make it very clear, and you need to understand that I'm here for you. You can come to me when you need me.
Right.
So abdication is not part of it, right?
Right.
With delegation, we do that a lot. We say, I'll just give this to you. Now it's your thing to do, right? So don't bother me anymore. That's the other end of micromanagement, right? When you're completely hands off. And that doesn't work either because now this person is sort of, like completely flummoxed. They don't know where to start or, and micromanagement is obviously like if you are going to actually, dictate each and every move of mine, then you may as well do it yourself. Why are you letting me? Why bother?
So, I think with a lot of bigger and older companies, the systems in place have a certain sort of comfort to a lot of people. But when you come in and you give them this new perspective on employee management and employee development, how do you do it without overwhelming the leadership? Where someone's like, oh, but I can't do this all the time.
So, Khizra, one of the things I employ is telling them the cost involved, right? This is a very time-consuming, the once a year or biannual is a very time-consuming and costly process.
Right.
Okay, so the pre-processes, the post-processes, during the process, and then it's not even fair. It is a biased opinion, right? And we're all biased individuals, right? So that, like you said, when people are getting up for the performance appraisal and doing the right things, it's the recency bias. You will remember what happened in the recent past and rate that person, right? And then people have, sometimes people are like a midline. So somebody would rate everybody a 3, right? Because they don't want to be an extremist.
Right.
Neither a 2 nor a 4.
Right.
And then there are those who say, oh no, everybody's doing a great job. And then I've come across people who say, one should not really sort of praise or, sort of reward them so much because then they sort of start thinking too much of themselves and their performance starts lagging because they think they're the cat's whiskers and they won't deliver as much.
Got it.
So there are all these different perspectives, but your question was, how would one convince? You tell them the cost involved, you tell them the number of hours involved, and you give them a simpler, better way. But then you do it gradually. It can't be a complete shift over. It has to be a gradual sort of, move towards that. So you do it in phases.
Right.
And that's always worked. So if they were on an annual one, you go, okay, so let's try biannual first. And then you go on to a quarterly one, right? And then a monthly. And keep it as simple as possible. I think simplicity. Say you had a cumbersome form. Let's just do away with that. Let's do real-time performance management.
So a lot of the new talent management practices rely a lot on sort of engagement and interaction. And in the new landscape, the post-COVID landscape, where now a more hybrid culture, some are completely remote, some are hybrid. How do you sort of gauge performance when they're not even physically in that space or around you?
See, COVID was a very, very different time, Khizra. I think COVID, one should not be comparing the remote aspect of today with COVID because COVID... A lot of us witnessed this where there were no boundaries. Our work crept into our lives, right?
That's true.
So we never knew when to shut off because we didn't, there were no precedents to this.
We were just figuring it out.
We were. And now we know, right? So there are So one is collaboration tools, right? The world has gone so far that we have so many collaboration tools and great tools that you can use for remote collaboration and everything. And then there are companies like, one example that comes to mind is Affinity here locally, where 1 day a week is mandated for everybody to be in the office, right? And
At the same time?
At the same time. And that is when you do your face-to-face collaboration, more of a meet and greet, get to know each other, have that human contact, right? In terms of how do we evaluate performance, look, we have dashboards for everything nowadays, right? Everything can actually be transparent, online, visible to all.
You have project management tools?
Yes, absolutely, right? So I don't even actually need to know. And when you talk about physical presence in the office, how do you really know I'm working? Yeah, I could be mentally
To be very honest, yes. There's so much procrastination we do in the office.
Totally, right? And I felt that with myself every time. I used to work in my last full-time job. I worked 1 day a week from home. And I felt that was the 1 day that I got so much done. Because there was no chit-chat over coffee. There were, like every time you leave your desk, somebody or the other approaches, you have some conversation, somebody walks in, interrupts your train of thought. And endless meetings.
So I have a question. Still talking about the remote and hybrid situation with, now where all these big global companies are getting their employees to come back into the office, there was this whole resistance where I'm a very important employee. I don't want to come into the office. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And then there were like these mass layoffs. And you had all of this content coming out of people being like, I got laid off. We all got laid off. What does that happen? Like, how does a company just decide, okay, fine, we're going to lay off all of these thousands of employees who are very key and integral employees who don't want to physically come into the office?
Look, if it's against the ethos of my company and the way I want to operate, then that's the way it will have to be. You have to send out a message sometimes, right? But I'm sure the decision was not simply because they were not coming into the office. There were other factors which sort of fed into that decision, right? So, but it's like, if I make a rule and say everybody's back in the office and we are no longer hybrid or remote, but 5 of my higher level executives decide that they don't want to come in, what kind of a message am I sending out if I let them and not the others? So what works for one will have to work for the rest.
So now another thing, and as the world evolves, as we become more informed, as we are becoming more confident in calling out injustices and all of these things, bias and fairness in sort of performance management is a concern for a lot of people, whether it's based on gender, whether it's based on your sort of capabilities or your background, your profile, etc., etc. How does one navigate that, and what are the systems that can be put into place to ensure that bias isn't something that plays into performance management?
It's a really tough one, Khizra, because bias will play into it, okay? Right. And it does. It always does. Right. If you recall, with was it the Boston Philharmonic? One of the symphonies, what they did was when they were hiring people, they realized that a lot of the musicians were all male. And they're like, what is the reason? Because when the trials were taking place, the bias played in and the women were excluded on that basis. So they started doing it behind a curtain.
Okay.
Right? So you don't see the person, you just hear the music. Right. And then you select on the basis of that. And lo and behold, a lot of women were selected.
Okay.
Google itself, this is quite a few years ago, they did a little internal test where they floated a resume, exact same resume. Okay. So John Doe and Jane Doe. Guess who got selected?
John Doe.
Obviously, right? And they're like, oh my God, we're shocked. So they did this whole unconscious bias series and they started talking about bias openly and they did a lot of bias training. So yes, I think one can't remove bias per se entirely. What you can do is create the awareness that the bias exists. Right? So you and I are also biased individuals. So what I've learned to do with myself is every time I have a certain biased thought, right, I'll check myself and I'll say, am I really evaluating all the aspects, or is this, me jumping to conclusions?
Is this also similar to, how like recently we're all so, we're suddenly telling people not to add their pictures to their resume?
It's a very interesting question, because when you say that, on the other hand, one of the best practices for LinkedIn, for instance, is that you've got to have a picture.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Otherwise, it doesn't. Any post that you have, if you don't have an image alongside, I mean, I could be writing about leadership, but the picture could show me playing football with my son. Anything, right? And that will get more sort of traction, more viewers, more readership.
That's so interesting.
Even when you call me in for an interview, you will see what I am or what I look like. So how does that, I mean, I guess not being eliminated at the very first step, but if the bias exists, you'll do it at the next step. Our way of rating is subjective.
Yes.
So the calibration comes in where you may think, 3 is great. I think a 4 is great. Yeah. So my person who gets a 4, your person gets a 3, they're equally matched. They work just as hard. They're equally qualified. They're giving as much as each other, as the other. So why the difference then? Calibration is when we all sit down as managers together, and I can challenge you and say, hey, why is that person a 4? Right? Prove it to us. And you come up with examples, and then we sort of see where 4s lie, 3s lies, 2 lies, and then calibrate it accordingly, adjust it.
So recently I was there's a lot of experts now on TikTok and on Instagram who are sending out like 1 minute little like hot takes. So there's one that's really trending these days, and it's one where the Gen Z employer, the millennial, will be like, I wish I hadn't worked so hard in my previous job, when actually your promotion and your growth in a company depends on how much the seniors like you and how likable you are and how approachable you are and how little you rock the boat. So, likable people, you could be qualified, or maybe you aren't qualified, but if you add sort of positive value to the company and the seniors like you, you will grow. How accurate is that?
I think that's human nature coming into play, right? And it's what we call culture fit. Right? So we all hire for culture fit.
Right.
We want to meet the individual and see, oh, I think this will be a great fit for a culture. But now they're saying that in addition to culture fit, you should look at culture add. Right? Who would be a likely candidate that would add more value to my culture?
Right.
May not be a fit, right? So you've heard about the peacock in the land of penguins, right?
Yeah.
And the peacock did really well, even though he looked different, acted different, did everything differently. But the work sort of, and he could do things that the others couldn't. So there's the diversity element.
Right.
Right. It's a very interesting story if you ever get a chance to read about this. It's the peacock in the land of penguins.
Okay, I'm going to look that up.
Yeah. And so they say that just because the peacock could do certain things, it could fly. So it saw the enemy approaching, whereas the penguins could not. They all looked alike. They all were a certain way. They all did certain things a certain way. And so the peacock was able to foretell a lot of things and preempt a lot of things. So it's the same thing with culture fit and culture add, right?
Right.
So get people who are different. But yes, don't we all want, I mean, I think in friends, when you're choosing friends or when you're choosing people you want to hang out with, we don't pick the negative ones.
Yeah.
Right? They drain your energy.
Yes.
They sap your strength. So what you want is positivity. So it brings us back to culture.
Right.
Create a culture where everybody wants to contribute.
True. And how familiar are you with the term personality hires?
Yeah, so
I'm very intrigued by that. There have been moments where I'm just like, am I? Like, could I have been a person? It's one of those things.
Yeah. So we're all a certain kind and we want like-minded people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes it's nice to have somebody who's not like-minded because they'll bring a different perspective to the table.
Like a breath of fresh air.
100%, right? But let them also play.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the inclusive aspect, it's a huge thing. They'll hire, but they won't give you a voice.
And that, I think, creates an even more toxic environment.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about talent management in an organization, that onus is usually on the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Who keeps the leadership accountable?
That's a great one, right? So In a lot of companies now, what we do is upward assessments, right? Which means that as whoever, I will be evaluating my manager as well on his capabilities, on how much he's supporting me and how much he's, vested into my growth, collaboration, XYZ. So yes, we do peer evaluations, we do upward evaluations. And then 360. Right? So 360 evaluations or reviews are a great tool because you evaluate yourself. 360 means it's a holistic view, right? So I will evaluate myself on a set number of questions. You are my colleague. You will do it for me also. My manager will do it. A client will do it. Somebody who reports to me will do it. Right? So it can't be like I say, Khizra has always been jealous of me and that's why she's rated me negatively. Here we have 3 or 4 different individuals in different roles who interact with you in different ways saying a certain thing. It must be true then.
Okay, that makes sense. How do you identify future leaders and how do you nurture them?
So one of the ways that a lot of companies use to identify future leaders is the 9-box grid that I talked about earlier.
Yes, got it.
Yeah. So the stars, and then you have your average performers.
Right.
And you always need those.
Right.
They're not maybe adding a lot of value. They're doing the work that needs to be done. And then you have your stars, and then you have your risks, and of course, 7 in between, right? So one of the ways is that you need to basically make those decisions based on performance and potential. So a lot of companies have hyper programs where they pick up on the entry level. So the emerging leaders program, or you have, Nestle has one, Google has one, all of them, right? Accenture, all of them have some program or the other in place where they're talking about performance and potentials. They see potential in a person and they want to groom that potential.
And what are those qualities they identify?
As in, how do you gauge potential? So potential is a very difficult thing to gauge.
What are those signs?
Because potential is a future thing, right? It is something that will manifest in the future. Performance is something I'm giving right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So for potential, a lot of times they talk about innovation capability, okay? How creative are you? How innovative are you? How flexible and adaptable are you?
So, but what you're saying is more democratic, as in like something you'd implement for entire workforce.
Yeah.
If I identified people who I think would make great leaders, great managers, how would I sort of curate their experience, their growth?
So it's really interesting. We're working on 2 different projects at this very point in time, which is doing exactly that. So people have identified certain people as successors in certain major roles.
Right.
And so the question arises, first is validate our selection.
Okay.
So have we selected the right ones?
Right.
So we as external consultants, third party, will come in, do certain things. Our method is a triangulated method where we use 3 different data points to verify that. Once the person is verified, the question is, what now? Right? So what we do is we sort of figure out where the competency gap is, how long will it take to bridge it, and what it will take to bridge it.
Right.
So those are part of the recommendations that we make, right? So this is the timeline that you're seeing for this individual. So resilience could be one, collaboration could be another, right? Critical thinking skills could be another. These are the areas in which the person needs to grow. And these are the resources, right? So you could do cross-collaboration with another department. You could do job rotation. You could send them on a leadership course. Have them take a online course. Lots of different ways in which you can fill that gap. And so we recommend certain ones and say this has this impact and this will have that impact, right? So a lot of times time is of the essence. The cost is a factor that one has to consider, right? And again, the person's ability and willingness.
Yeah. How do you identify signs of cultural decay in an organization in terms of like high turnover?
Absolutely. High turnover is one of those things. A toxic environment is where, there is the management is not accountable. The leadership is not accountable. They don't walk the talk. They say one thing, do another.
Yeah.
Okay, and that creates a lot of toxicity.
Right.
Because the message is not very clear, right? There's duality there. You're
Right.
saying one thing, you're doing another. I don't know what's happening here. The other thing is, when there's a lot of when people's well-being, mental well-being is not looked after, right? When the lines of where profit and growth blur, right?
Yeah.
You have to be very clear about, yes, profitability is very important, but so is the growth of that individual. So we are not, don't treat them like workhorses, right? Don't just squeeze every last thing out of them because you want to meet your growth targets.
Yeah.
What you need to do is make sure that their growth is also being accounted for.
Right.
They're growing in their roles. They're growing in their knowledge, in their capability, in their competence.
Right.
So give them that space to do that. People talk a lot about learning and growth, and every organization, we're big on that, and we have continuous learning system, and we're big on that. But when push comes to shove, they won't send the employee for a training because, oh, no, this is the end of the month and, we really can't afford it right now. And,
Yeah.
one, we can't afford it. Two, we need this person. He's critical. He needs to work. So, that's a toxic culture for me.
There are a lot of situations where you will have a really great sort of like a manager or like a creative director or a head of business or those kind of situations who will be great at what he does, but he will be a very toxic leader.
Yeah.
And under him, the turnover
Yeah.
is significant. And whether you're complaining to HR, whether you're sort of putting in that feedback, the turnover stays consistent and that person is still in the role. And when does a company sit down and factor in the cost of this versus the cost of maintaining that?
Yeah. So be very short-sighted in this, and this is what I've seen time and again, Khizra. People, the leadership, the owners, call it if you will, or, the CEOs, whoever run the company, they are more focused on the bottom line. Okay. And that is a very short-sighted view because they think this person brings in the money, right? He's our best salesperson or he is our best creative person and we get business because of him.
Yeah.
So what if we're losing people? We'll find new ones.
Yeah.
Right? The turnover is nothing. Now, like you said, they're not comparing the cost of, which is higher, re-hiring for these positions and the damage it's doing to the rest of the company in terms of toxicity.
Yes.
Or the money that this person is bringing in. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Now, why are they toxic? So a lot of times they grow up or they have dealt with bosses who have behaved in similar manners and they feel this is the way to go. People are generally, and this is my experience by and large, people become managers, like I said, by sheer dint of loyalty or numbers of years served.
Right.
Okay? And you're good at what you do. But management is a completely different ball game, right? A worker is somebody who works. A manager is somebody who gets work out of people.
Yeah.
So now it becomes a people game.
Yeah.
You need to be able to deal with people and they don't have those skills. They don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to manage. They don't know how to resolve conflicts. So they tend to avoid them. They don't know how to work collaboratively. So one of our most popular programs in my consulting practice is first-time leaders, right? What are the skills first-time leaders need to know?
Okay. And how do you propose an instant intervention when you start seeing these red flags? What is your first step of intervention?
So the last company that we did this ad was our recommendation obviously was to remove the toxic element.
Really?
You have to, Khizra.
That's literally like cutting an arm off for a lot of companies.
Because until you do what you're doing, what the message you're sending out is this kind of behavior is all right, firstly, right? I am condoning this. I'm not condemning it because I'm letting it happen under my eye. Which means I will give rise to other people who will mimic this behavior because this is being rewarded.
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
People will do what is being rewarded. They will replicate that behavior.
Right.
So when you talk about, mission-driven companies, value-driven companies, values are not just like a placard on the wall, right?
Yeah.
They have to be lived. You hire on the basis of your values and you fire on the basis of your values and everything in between. You reward on the basis of your values. You reprimand on the basis of your values.
Your values have to be like set in stone.
Yeah, and they have to be communicated well.
Yes.
So, you have very vague terms, or a lot of values are very similar across the board, right? So teamwork, integrity, collaboration, customer first mindset, everybody pretty much has the same ones, right?
Yeah.
But what does it mean in your context? How do you unravel this? What are the behaviors which are associated with this?
So do you think the definition of a value system in an organizational context has changed from not just like business development and mission vision kind of values, but to more like human-centric values? Like now, if I was to take away from what you're saying, the values would be respect for your fellow employees, maintaining integrity, maintaining this, as opposed to constant growth and forward facing or those kind of things. So there's been an evolution.
100%. And like Richard Branson said, he said, take care of your employees and they'll take care of the customers for you.
Absolutely.
Right? They will come. The business will come when your employees are happy.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to, even a simple thing like when you visit the supermarket, if you see disgruntled employees there, you just get a bad vibe. You don't want to be around there, right?
Yeah,
you want to
100%.
go to a place where they're happy people who are working there are happy.
Yeah.
You get a smile, you get a greeting. So yes.
And so, I mean, there are some places where there's like a reward system, like a incentive-based reward system. How does it make sense in the money sense? Like you can't constantly be rewarding employees. It becomes a very sort of incentive-based performance, like the carrot and the stick situation. Sure, it works, but is it sustainable?
So now they say there are non-monetary rewards are just as important, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times that pat on the back, that shout out on social media, that certificate, right? A lot of these non-monetary things are what recognition and reward are about. So you try and use those instead. Okay. It's not all about money. And money, how much and when do you where do you draw the line?
And how do you quantify a certain achievement?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So yes, money is important in sales and a lot of spaces. You will need to incentivize them with money.
Yeah.
Right? A percentage off. But that's what startups are doing, right? So they give you a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
And now you have skin in the game.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so it's like mine.
And it makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Because you're just like, if I do this well, it benefits me.
Of course. If the company does well, I do well.
Yeah. Fauzia, this has been an absolute pleasure. This conversation was so personal to me because I have constantly been an employee in places. I'm constantly working in organizations. I've become one of those people who's very deeply impacted by office culture.
Yeah.
I'm a very sort of, like, I can't sit in a corner and finish my work. If I see someone in distress, if I see a conflict happening around me, I have to get involved. And that's why I was telling you that, doing my research before coming and meeting you, I was so intrigued and I was like, is this my calling?
Yeah,
because it just sounds so relevant because I'm so interested in culture and company culture and how that really affects performance and productivity in a company. Yeah. So this was a lot of fun. And thank you for humoring all of my this TikTok and that TikTok and Instagram insights. But thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and coming on to the podcast. And we're so happy you were here.
Thank you so much, Khizra. It has been a pleasure for me too. I really enjoyed our conversation. And, there's always so much more one could have said, but yes, time is limited.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of She Talks Business. We will see you soon with another very power-packed interview with a really amazing woman. Thank you so much. Bye.